So every election cycle, we hear the same things to those skeptical and especially those non-voters. Y'all know them. If you don't vote, you don't have the right to complain. A non-vote is basically a vote for the other side. If you're black and you question voting, you will definitely hear about how your ancestors died for you to have the right to vote. That's heavy. But I question, are we actually concerned about why poor and marginalized and people of color feel like their vote doesn't matter? And are we really willing to do the work to change those things to really bring about what we want to see in our society? We are all familiar with this narrative that poor and people of color don't vote. Voter turnout is notoriously low in primaries, in local elections, and even in the 2016 presidential election. Black voter turnout dropped 7 points, while white turnout rose. And we all know what happened after that. But what a lot of folk don't know is that actually, during the Obama years, black voter turnout was the highest amongst all groups. We haven't recovered that since then. And there are expensive consultants and campaign strategists who are all trying to figure out, what is that missing link? What can we do to turn out black voters and other voters consistently? So resources are pumped into voter turnout. They hire canvassers and organizers who do incessant and aggressive voter registration drives. And then by October, they're knocking on thousands and thousands of doors, trying to have these face-to-face conversations to get people to turn out to vote in November. Essentially, they've been able to replicate those grassroots organizing strategies of candidates like Barack Obama, but they haven't been able to replicate those results. And what's really happened is that politics and how we deal with voters has become so transactional. Campaigns and even those canvassers treat voters like consumers. They're consumers of politics. And they're deciding between competing politics of other people cooked up somewhere else. It is incredible how the black vote is simultaneously undervalued, but also over-relied on. But all of these strategists know that when black turnout is high, the Democrats are going to have a good day. When black turnout is low, the Republicans are going to have a good day. But the black community itself, sometimes it feels like we're going to have the same day either way. Not voting is not the problem. Not voting is the symptom. Not voting is a symptom of unfair and corrupt political and economic systems that have seen power and resources hoarded by fewer and fewer, while the interests and the will of the everyday person, of the majority of us, is just pushed to the side. It's just underrepresented. For those people who are in power, who have power, the power of the vote is undeniable, but the powerlessness of the vote to the marginalized, to the disenfranchised, to the oppressed is always understated. Voting is not going to be a silver bullet for marginalized communities. Voting isn't going to save us. Not when we don't have anybody to vote for, not when the issues that matter most to us aren't on a ballot. Because what does the right to vote mean to that poor person of color who has never had the option on a ballot to vote to empower themselves? What does the ability to vote mean to a person who doesn't have the resources to get themselves or anybody who is like them on a ballot? What does the responsibility to vote mean to that person who has never and probably will never see their daily lives and the conditions of their communities change in any real way, whether or not, or whoever, or no matter who, whether it's a Democrat or not, is in office? We have to get serious. We have to get serious about actually empowering people, which means that we have to actually start talking about power. We don't have financial power, and we know that that's the power that rules the world. But political power, through electoral politics, we can get that. That's the type of power that oppressed people in America at this moment are most likely to access if we get intentional and if we organize, particularly at the local level. So we have to start shifting into a process of actually engaging people on pursuing political power, not just voting. So that means that we have to start first educating people on what is political power. How do we get it? And what can we do with it once we have it? It's easy to believe in political participation when you and people like you and your interests are always represented on a ballot or in those halls of power. Mainly if you are wealthy, white, and a male. But what about the rest of us? Experiences and perspectives like mine and yours and all of ours are desperately needed in those halls of power. They need to be represented. So if you really want to talk about and get people to start voting more, we have to talk about how do we empower people of color, poor people, marginalized people, LGBTQ folk. How do we empower those folks? How can we start supporting them to get onto ballots? How can we support them to get elected? That's the work that we have to move to, because we know that we have to start putting our money, putting our time, putting our support where our mouths are. When we start to do that, we will start to see the difference. And we already have. We have seen more women and people of color running for office this year than probably any of us have ever seen before. And also, I would say because of that, we've also seen in this election, in this term, we've also seen more energy and excitement and people who are really getting involved, not just in voting, but in participating in the electoral process. They're volunteering and they're donating because of that diversity of candidates. We saw it here with my own election. Before I ran, my community had functionally no options. We had the same political figures and candidates run for decades, year after year, unopposed. They didn't even have opposition in primaries. And they were all white and male, middle class and middle-aged. So if you are a young black girl growing up in a poor, under-resourced community, are you really likely to see a future as a legislator or a governor if you have never seen yourself reflected in those positions? And even still, it's too hard to find a person of color or a woman, and especially a poor person on your ballot. To find a poor black woman on your ballot at the same time, that's a unicorn. But when we do get those folk on ballots, that's the difference that we see. Nationwide, after we've had what was and what we know to be the most diverse class of candidates running and winning elections at the state and the national level, we saw the biggest increase in voter turnout in a midterm since 1966. In my own election, in my own district, we saw an increase in voter turnout by 54% as we went on to elect only the first black woman legislator from Western Pennsylvania. It matters to have that sort of representation on the ballot. It helps. And this isn't just identity politics. No, that's insulting. All of our experiences and our identities inform our politics. It only seems like when it's my identity that it's a problem, because we got to get way more serious about diversity. We just can't give diversity and representation lip service like we've been doing, because we know that when we have those diverse candidates, when we have young candidates and bold candidates and people of color and people who are closer to those issues, who have lived the experiences that everyday people in our districts have lived, those are the people that get us excited. And that excitement and that energy is what we need to carry us in to 2019 and 2020 and 2022 and forever. That's the electoral system that we want to work towards. So what do we need to do to build sustainable political power for the powerless? That's going to be a difficult task. The barriers keeping us from that sort of power are vast. There is a lack of good candidates. There's a lack of staff that can help those candidates to win campaigns. There's a lack of access to money for those type of candidates. And we're not even getting into the access to ballot issues that we have, the systemic disenfranchisement. We're not talking about the antiquated election laws and rules and customs that we have. We're not talking about gerrymandering. Those are all TED Talks for a different day. But there are almost no resources for anybody looking to build that infrastructure to support and create candidates who are representing poor communities so that they can win elections. And those are the barriers that me and so many other candidates, especially candidates of color, come up against every election cycle. Those are the barriers that even after we see this amazing wave of people-centered candidates of color and candidates who are women, we are still going to see pushback. We're still going to get that situation where if you are not a male, particularly a white and affluent candidate, you still might not be able to break through. And that's going to create a hopelessness for people who are looking to something more, to people who are looking to be represented so that they can feel like their vote actually means something. It doesn't take a political scientist to know that the people who are closest to the issues are the people who should be serving. And it doesn't take one to know that our issues are never going to be prioritized by people who are benefiting from our struggle. So are we really surprised when people say that they don't feel like their vote matters? I'm an elected official. I rely on voters. I rely on people turning out to vote for my job now. But honestly, I'm just not interested in helping my people to become more discerning and active consumers of other people's politics. I believe that we are perfectly capable of developing our own politics. And yes, I know it's risky telling people that voting might not matter as much as you think it is. What I'm really trying to say is that just voting isn't enough. That we have to vote, yes, but we also have to run. We have to be able to run for all types of offices at the local level, the state level, at the national level. We have to organize. We have to support each other. We have to do everything. We have to have concurrent strategies to create the society that we want to see, and we have to do it all at the same time. But I am saying that we do have to also recognize what are those barriers that are really keeping us from participating in this system. So before you say that my ancestors died for me to have the right to vote, no. My ancestors died for me to have access to the same power that everybody else has, to be able to run for office and govern and create and make resources for our own communities. So what I'm asking you is that before you shame somebody who is a voter, somebody who doesn't feel like they should vote, before you tell them that they have to vote or shut up, encourage them and let them know all the ways that they can participate in this system. Because when we don't have anybody to vote for, we have to, we must, and we absolutely can run ourselves. And when we run ourselves, we will always know that our vote matters. Thank you.